To the total astonishment of, well, no one very much, the touted phone call between President Trump and President Putin delivered absolutely zero breakthroughs whatsoever. While some may have been idly fantasizing that such an outcome would have had Donald Trump waking up suddenly to the real nature of a man that he was dealing with, heading off to his expert advisors to consider what serious measures could be taken to hold Russia to account, well, obviously none of that happened. Firstly, because Trump has no interest in holding Russia accountable, as he has demonstrated over and over again. And secondly, because he and Doge fired any actual experts they had in the White House a long time ago, so all he's got left is his golfing buddy and fellow real estate magnate Steve Witkoff, and he thinks Putin is just a fabulous fellow. The alleged purpose of the call was to push Putin into agreeing to a 30-day ceasefire with Ukraine as the first step of a peace process. However, as we've discussed a number of times, the context when Trump talks to Putin is always that Trump is representing the interests of himself and the United States, not of Ukraine. And ultimately, Trump is interested in the potential benefits to be realized if the United States and Russia can normalize relations and to engage in trade and other beneficial activities together. After all, when Trump imposed his April 2nd tariffs against the whole world, he hit the islands solely inhabited by penguins, but did not hit Vladimir Putin's Russia. Most favoured trading status indeed, you might say. And that was the pitch that the Russians had disclosed in outline that they were working on in their extensive preparation for this call. When it comes to managing Trump, they obviously know exactly what they're doing. In spite of having failed on the substantive issue that was supposed to have been the point, Trump came away swearing that the call went very well. He then presented the part of the conversation that basically suggested he should butt out of the negotiations as another win, saying that Russia and Ukraine will immediately start negotiations towards a ceasefire, which is another way of Putin saying no to the demand that he agree immediately to a ceasefire. And Putin knows that so long as he keeps putting forward the sort of demands for a ceasefire that would normally be the subject of substantive peace negotiations, e.g. the recognition of the control of territory, then there will of course be no agreement for a ceasefire. And in that scenario, it's entirely possible he will be able to persuade the Russia/MAGA part of the world that it all comes down to Ukraine's intransigence. But Donald Trump had even more joyous news, and he said this: "The tone and spirit of the conversation were excellent." And he added, "Russia wants to do large-scale trade with the United States when this catastrophic bloodbath is over, and I agree. There is a tremendous opportunity for Russia to create massive amounts of jobs and wealth. Its potential is unlimited." He went on to say, "The Vatican, as represented by the Pope, has stated that it would be very interested in hosting the negotiations. Let the process begin." Nothing would suit Trump better than to have the tedious detail of actually negotiating peace delegated to someone else. You know, a lesser figure, like the Pope. After all, Trump has tried tweeting in all caps and that didn't work, so who knows what could be done. So long as everyone remembers, of course, that it was Donald Trump's inspired idea to refer them to the Pope in the first place. So should, by a miracle, actual peace emerge from the adult discussions that ensue, it won't stop Trump from being able to swoop in at the end to pose for the cameras and audition for that Nobel Peace Prize. Only people fully embedded in the cult of Trump could believe that any of this constitutes an achievement of any sort, except, of course, an achievement for Vladimir Putin of his goals of keeping Trump from going rogue a little bit longer while still giving him nothing at all. If ever President Putin writes a book titled The Art of the Deal, I think you should probably read it. I certainly would. Trump was asked by a reporter after the call if there was a red line that would prompt him to exit the peace process. Well, let's ignore how quaint it is that the reporter seemed to believe that Trump was meaningfully in the peace process. Trump replied that he had such a red line in his head, but it was not something he's going to announce. At this stage, I would be hard-pressed to understand why anyone wouldn't encourage the US to walk away from being part of the peace process. I have heard nobody saying anything like, "Oh no, but that means Steve Witkoff won't be having meetings with President Putin anymore. And oh no, it means he won't be telling Tucker Carlson how Putin is right about everything. Quick, let's tell Trump he can have all our minerals completely for free, just like he originally wanted. Only please don't go, President Trump." The downside would be if the US decided to pull any and all operational support for Ukraine. The intelligence services that enable them to use the weapons they already have, the access to the military-grade service on Elon Musk's Starlink satellite network service. Now, I haven't heard that that is at stake. Whatever happens, I doubt Ukraine believes that it will be the recipient of major new weapons donations from America. Possibly more caches of ammunition and support packages, the value of which will all be added up, of course, as needing to be repaid within the now signed minerals deal. But if that doesn't stop, it would be a benefit, not a problem, if Trump stopped being interested and, became focused on something else, anything else. I repeat what I've said before, though, it won't happen. I mean, not fully. Sure, he doesn't want to be doing this day-to-day boring stuff where he, claims he's going to make something happen, and then Putin metaphorically laughs in his face, and then he has to spin that as a great win somehow for him and for the world. But likewise, there is no major worldwide conflict, there is no global issue that Trump doesn't want to be at the centre of. Hilariously, his followers think he's an anti-globalist, even as he's energetically seeking to reshape the global world order all around himself. But that's what he does. The will he, won't he walk away line is just another of his ways of keeping the centre of attention on him. People ask, "Oh my God, will he leave?" without ever pausing to think, what would be the problem if he did? Now, at the end of June, NATO will have its next summit in The Hague, and that is going to be a huge mess of significant moments. Non-US NATO members all know, although none of them are going to acknowledge it in public, that the US under Trump is not a credible signatory to the Article 5 Mutual Defence Clause of NATO. They also know that Putin knows that, everyone else knows that, with the exception possibly of a few journalists. But at the same time, Trump will be cosplaying his role as the big power in the room, the one who is demanding of the other NATO members that they up their defence spending. And of course they're already doing that, not because he told them to, but because they now realise the US is as likely to become an adversary, for example over Greenland, than it is to actually engage in mutual defence with the countries that some people refer to as its allies. So imagine trying to discuss the strategy for the next 2 years for NATO, with all of that as your context. All the NATO members will be pretending that the US remains the bedrock of NATO, hoping that if they can collude in that fantasy, it might just persuade Trump to live up to it in reality. Yeah, well, good luck with that. But at the same time, all those other partners will be discussing the alternative alliance between themselves and how they defend what's left of the free world, using only the resources available to them that are not American in origin. That discussion, of course, is happening right now, probably every day. It was one of the driving forces behind yesterday's Brexit reset agreement, for instance, and will continue quietly for as long as the myth of the old alliance can still be held together. All of this leaves Putin to just keep going as he wants to. He also talked up the call with Trump, telling a reporter it had been very candid and therefore very useful. He said that Russia was ready to work with the Ukrainian side on a memorandum about the possible future peace agreement. But since, as he repeated, Russia retains its insistence that any peace deal has to address what it insists are the root causes of the crisis, which, in other words, Putin's hallucinations that Ukraine is run by Nazis and hence why Russia needs to obliterate it and run it, which can be comfortably assumed to be the basis for precisely zero progress on achieving a ceasefire. Hence, leaving him to continue to focus on the military action on the ground, which is what he still wants. Putin's assumption is that Ukraine gets depleted in war quicker than Russia does, that European solidarity in support of Ukraine falls apart increasingly over time, and Trump's role as a spoiler will only ever really work to his side's advantage. Because even if Trump and Putin's relationship should sour, won't result in the US taking any kind of concerted and smart position in relation to the war on the ground. The Europeans, for their part, have announced additional sanctions on Russia once the results of the Trump-Putin call became clear. While Trump was pretending that it was a highly positive call and a great outcome, they were expressing the contrary view simply from their actions, targeting Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers to try to make the sanctions busting more difficult for Putin to achieve. They do this alone. There's no suggestion that Trump has any interest in imposing future sanctions against Russia, regardless of the bipartisan bill seeking to do exactly that is sitting right now in Congress. Now, I thought that would be obvious to everyone. But according to the Financial Times, one person who was a witness to the conversation between Trump and the European leaders and President Zelensky after he'd finished with his discussion with Putin said this: "The leaders were stunned by the US president's description of what was agreed. They added it was clear Trump was not ready to put greater pressure on Putin to come to the negotiating table in earnest." Were they really stunned? I mean, I can't believe that I and many others who observe this from afar, I mean carefully, sure, but still only based on public sources, can have concluded so readily that this call would go exactly the way that it did, and yet the people directly involved were stunned to discover it. I think it's more likely that they were providing the verbal feedback to the president they believed might be most likely to encourage him to reflect and reevaluate the outcome of his call, however small a chance that might have been. After all, everyone is now seeking to manipulate Trump into doing whatever is seen to be useful for them. So they flatter him, they tell him what he wants to hear, and within that extensive wrapper, maybe they can provide a nudge or two in the direction that they wish he would move. Since the United States has largely lost its own agency as a player on the world stage in any strategic sense, that's what it's been reduced to, just down to who can best manipulate the total hapless idiots now running the most powerful nation in the world. I'd love to think that this would now mean the various players could reorientate themselves around the grown-up process of supporting and defending Ukraine, seeking to continue to pile pressure on Russia. Unfortunately, though, I suspect there will be more cosplaying, there will be more grandstanding, there will be more will he, won't he nonsense, all from the person who said he could end the war in a day and couldn't, and who said that, well, he could at least end the war within 100 days and couldn't, who patently couldn't, who is so totally out of his depth, sending his clown best buddy all on his own to negotiate with the most ruthless and skilled dictator in the world. Just beggars belief. So yes, the clown show will continue because the clown in chief must be the centre of attention. And people will largely focus on that because it's very shiny and distracting rather than the impact of a war on the people of Ukraine and on various other victims of Putin's Peter the Great worship. People like Elena Boyko, who lives in the city of Sumy. She told the New York Times this week that Trump's diplomatic effort was a theatrical performance that has nothing to do with the reality of trenches or bomb shelters. She lost her husband and the father to her daughters in the war, and her home also was completely destroyed. Like other Ukrainian voices, she reflected that people like her will carry on because they have to, and ultimately they can only rely on themselves. That is the sobering reality to set against the thunder and the lightning of the ego show.